You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
Dairy One's Soil Laboratory provides a variety of industries with soil testing and analysis. For most of our customers, their businesses literally start from the ground up. A soil analysis will help our customers ensure that the right nutrients are available in the soil or if additional fertilizers are needed. These decisions will impact their plant growth and yield. If you need to improve your soil's health, Dairy One is ready to help. Contact the Dairy One Soil Laboratory by emailing soil@dairyone.com. That's dairyone.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. I'm your host, Connie Kuber with Seal Pro Silage Barrier Films by Connor Agriscience. It's a damp, foggy morning here in Central California, and the U.S. has seen extreme cold temperatures here in the first part of January and snow in the last week here. So we're wondering, how are your cattle doing? We ask much of them, and the stressors pile up, and not just weather. So today we're going to talk about the transition between the dry cow period and lactation, and we're going to get technical, so buckle up. My guests today are from ADM. We have Dr. Gabby Acetoze and Dr. Brian Lammers. We are going to discuss the metabolic changes that occur and how their work and research can help cows get through that stage more efficiently and gracefully. So welcome, Gabby and Brian, to the Dairy Voice podcast. Gabby, let's start with you. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us how you got to this point in your career with ADM?
Thank you, Connie. Thank you all here with the Dairy Voice podcast. I'm Gabby Acetoze. I'm a director of technical sales for the ruminant business of ADM Animal Nutrition. So if you haven't noticed by now, I have a little bit of accent. I'm a Brazilian transplant. I came to the US about 15 years ago for an internship that turned into a master's in beef cattle nutrition and then a PhD in dairy cattle nutrition, both of them from UC Davis. I got hired by ADM right away after graduate school, and I started working as an account manager, as a territory manager for the Western accounts of ADM, and progressed into my career years, and now I lead our team of technical support under the CD&D new structure of ADM Animal Nutrition to provide the technical support for our technologies and our customers in the North America territory, so USA and Canada as well.
And you're recording from where?
I record from Tulare, California, where I reside here in the heat of the dairy production in California. This is where I'm from, married, and I have a little boy, 6-year-old.
Very good. Well, thank you for that and welcome. And Brian, how about you? Tell us about yourself.
Like Gabby, I went through graduate school and I actually completed my PhD from Penn State in '98 and started working for ADM right out of graduate school. Had the opportunity to get some different experiences with being in Indiana, Michigan, and here the last 19 years I've been in Western Ohio on my family's farm. I grew up with dairy cattle, a dairy farm, but my brother was the one that took the lead and ownership of the farm as I was second fiddle, if you will, the second part of that. And actually 3 years ago, he decided to discontinue operating and milking cows. But I still am very involved in the dairy industry. I enjoy actually breeding dairy cattle. My family's had brown Swiss and breeding brown Swiss dairy cattle for about 105 years now. Actually, this is the 105th year for our family. Wow. So it's actually an interest. I'm active in the National Brown Swiss Association, but my focus in here is with research, working with dairy farms, looking for opportunities to improve their operation, cow health, performance, and profitability. So I am working closely with dairy farms in primarily the Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio areas. Also working with some of the ADM people in these areas, but more hands-on, on farm, on a at least weekly basis, if not daily basis, to work with dairy farms and look for opportunities, improve the performance of their cows. So that's a little bit of my background. Thank you also for inviting me to be here on the podcast. And that's obviously an interesting topic because it really sets the tone of the lactation cycle of the cows as we go through the dry period into lactating period, and really sets their performance and what they can do.
Well, thank you both, Gabby and Brian, for being here today to talk about this stage of life for cows. And I'm going to be interested to know too, as we discuss things, any differences that might occur between first calf heifers and cows that have been in the herd for a while milking, that might be second or third lactation. So this is going to be great. The transition cows, what do we know about the transition period?
So first of all, one of the things that I encounter as we discuss transition cows is really the definition, right? I think it's pretty simple to understand. That is the period between, being pregnant, calving, and then, going into lactation. But however, the days that this period entails sometimes vary from farm to farm. So let's just set the stage here that we'll be talking about, 21 days or so pre-calving to at least, what we would call peak lactation, or even, a little over in some cases. So I think it's good that we set the stage, as we'll be talking to transition periods really within those 21 days pre to, peak or post-peak, so to speak. And Brian alluded there during his introduction. It's the period that will set, the success for the lactation of that first lactation heifer, or, those mature cows, and it really will dictate how the remainder of her 305 days in milk will look like. It really is set up right here in this period, where we prepare her to give the best conditions for her to calf, and how we feed to give her a good jump start into her lactation.
Transform dairy data from numbers into valuable decision-making information with Herd HQ, the ultimate web-based platform brought to you by DRMS. Leverage advanced analytics, benchmarking, and alert systems to optimize productivity, minimize costs, and improve herd health. If you're part of the Beef on Dairy movement, check out Keeper Beef. Love your iPhone or iPad? Cow Compass will provide you with extensive animal and herd information, no matter what type of device you use. Do you like charts and graphs? Check out Dairy Depot, with over 100 charts and tables. Herd HQ is available to all herds that process their DHI data with DRMS. Don't miss out on this game-changing dairy management solution. Contact DRMS today to schedule a demo.
So then you're including early lactation in what you're calling the transition period.
Correct.
Brian, anything to add about that?
No, very good description. I guess just to add further details, it takes a couple weeks, if not a month, after calving for that cow's metabolism to be fully functioning, to balance her consumption of needs nutritionally from a intake standpoint, to balance out what her genetic potential is to make milk. These cows have the genetic potential that is immense, and to provide the nutrients that are needed to meet those requirements take a bit of time for her metabolism, not only within her, her body tissues, but also within the mammary gland, to balance out to where those nutrients are being utilized efficiently, as well as her consumption of nutrients match what she's putting in her milk.
Can you give me the top 3 challenges that are faced by these transition cows?
I would say that there's probably, a top 10 into this list, but we'll dive into the top 3. And I think, one of the first things that we look it up in this period that poses a multitude of challenges to the cows, and even more so to heifers, because those animals are still fulfilling now a requirement to go into lactation, but they still have a requirement for growth as well. So there are more drains for energy requirements on those animals. So those heifers perhaps would face even more challenges than a mature cow. So I think a few thoughts that come to my mind. What was the state of those cows when they calved, right? Like what were their body condition scores? Things that we need to look it up quite consistently on our daily checks is the condition of those cows on the dry off or the dry pens. So we really look into providing them really good conditions so they can successfully or potentially have a successful calving. Based on that, what kind of complications potentially could come from the calving itself, right? That could lead to issues such as retained placenta, metritis, right? What is the environment that those cows calved? How clean and what are the sanitary conditions that those animals spent during those hours where they were calving? Hypocalcemia, right? We're all fully aware that there is a greater demand for calcium as those cows go into lactation. So there is really a big pool of calcium that is needed. Are those animals capable to mobilize that calcium and to put it into their new higher demands for it on the onset of lactation? And I think Brian already touched on this, right? Intake. So cows during the transition period, I know to be potentially undergoing what we call a negative energy balance. So their intake is depressed, their milk production is increasing. So there is a little bit of a flip on a curve in regards to their energy demand compared to what they are putting it in. And that really can pose a really big challenge as far as, meeting the new energy requirements, but not quite there on the intake due to depressed intake, which is a normal phenomena after those animals undergo calving, for example. And I think in one of the latest thoughts here that Brian and I shared is like how cattle are animals of prey. So Brian.
Yeah, so some of the more recent research has been about the stressors of animals and how it can impact her immune system. The immune system does require a lot of moving parts, a lot of we kind of think of metabolism as nutrients, but there's a similar thing going on within the immune system of the animal. And when cattle are animals of prey and they're more sensitive to stressors, overcrowding, inconsistent environmental atmosphere, be it feeding or changing pens or changing animals within the pen frequently, they are much more sensitive than what we can relate to. And these changes can influence the cow's immune system. She can become what we call overstimulated, or another term that's been used in our industry is inflammation, is another descriptor that describes that cow being, her immune system being elevated too high. That feeds back on the metabolism of the animal, and we find that it affects then the nutrient metabolism. Some of the nutrients that are being controlled by like the liver and insulin, then we can start to see some metabolic problems of the animal. So we used to think that body condition, calcium metabolism was the only things to really focus on from the dry period into the lactating changes that happens in transition, but we're starting to better understand how things like crowding and pen movements and just environmental conditions, how the cows are so much more sensitive to that, and that can affect the immune system and also then affect then the metabolism of the cow. We know that for instance, retained placentas and metritis, that is really an immune response of the animal recognizing the placenta is now being a foreign body, and to have the right level of immune response to release and expel the placenta, and then uterus to volute and become smaller and shrink. And then you also have the other sensitivities to immune system. We know that cows that have immune challenges can be more susceptible to pneumonia and to mastitis. So it's much bigger than what we thought just 10 years ago. What the cows are all sensitive to. It's not just nutrition. There's a lot of management items that are related in how we want to make it a dry period, the close-up period, the calving period, a low stress environment for that cow.
Have you run out of silage? Had to buy expensive, marked up feed to fill the gap? Maybe production's dropped due to lower dry matter intakes. Are molds or mycotoxins creeping through your piles or bunkers? And pitching the rot is a dangerous pain. Oxygen is the enemy. Pack it out, then keep it out with Seal Pro, the professional grade silage barrier film protection chosen by top professional farmers like you. Make more, better, safer silage with Seal Pro. Learn more at sealprosilage.com.
I would imagine that with first calf heifers, you have even more of a reaction because they're changing environments. They're walking into a parlor to be milked that they've never maybe been in before. They're dealing with other people that have never have handled them before. And besides, they just had a calf. I would think that that is even a greater problem for those cows.
Great observation, Connie. That's a great observation. I would even add to that, think about the time that people spend with the lactating herd, right? So the lactating herd is brought up to the milking parlor 2 or 3 times a day, or if it's in robot herds, you have employees walking through those pens multiple times a day. And so the cattle during the lactating period, the mature cattle, are very used to interactions with people, with humans, right? Many times our heifers don't have that kind of interaction. They have a greater flight response when heifers during the calving period and into the milking herd, and are much more nervous, much more, I guess, flight oriented because of that. They're just not as comfortable with such a close interaction with people. It's interesting, just an observation. You find that people are interacting with them as heifers, walking through the pens multiple times daily when they're heifers. They're often much more calmer also as cows because they learn and become more comfortable with that human interaction when they're younger, and then also can be a lower stress period for them when they go through that transition and enter the lactating period, which their human interaction is much closer and much more frequent. So that's a good observation on how these heifers can be more sensitive, and we can see more retained placentas and more metritis in heifers because I think of that changing environment that they're not used to, whereas more mature cows, they've had maybe multiple calves and they've had some of those experiences that make them a little less sensitive to.
What other ways can we help these cows get through this transition period?
Pen density, feed bunk density, as far as the amount of space per animal for the feed bunk. So we want a stocking density that is low, and we know that heifers are more sensitive to that than mature cows. So evaluating the stocking density, especially during that transition period prior to calving and after calving, heifers are very sensitive to that, more sensitive to lactating cows, probably because the mature cows have just more experience with it, having gone through it once or twice. Also, just the human interaction that comes with it as well.
Let's talk more about the nutrition and how we can get these cows ready, and some of the work that you've done to develop some products that can help them. I'm going to ask, you've got a product out called Nexulin. What is it, first of all, and how did you come up with this?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting concept. So I think for Connie and the other ones here with us at the podcast. So basically, Nexulin is a rumen bypass capsicum source, which has shown to play an interesting role on glucose sparing. And we might spend some time there on the glucose sparing, but I'll make a pause here on the capsicum oleoresin or chili pepper extract. I think we would be surprised, how much information is out there on the scientific domain around capsicum. So we all have had bumps and bruised, and perhaps used some creams that gives you the sensation of getting really cold or really hot. Those are based, the active ingredient, it's a source of capsicum. So There is a lot that has been researched so far, in the diabetic, domain around the use of capsicum oleoresin and how that plays a role in glucose metabolism. Capsicum is a known analgesic and anti-inflammatory, so that's why those creams that you buy over the counter helps with pains and inflammations in the ruminant sphere. One of the things that we know the most about capsicum is also how it helps with the mitigation of heat stress. So there is a lot more that we know just within our areas here on the ruminant side about capsicum, and perhaps it is the most researched phytomolecule to this date. And we have been very happy and hands-on working with Nexolin, which is the source of rumen bypass capsicum.
Thank you for that information. What more can you tell us about glucose sparing and how this works in transition cows?
What we're looking here is, and one of the reasons why this particular product has gone to this technology of ensuring rumen bypass, it's because in order to provide this glucose-sparing effect, we are looking at a particular vanillin receptor located in the lower gut, so located in the intestines of those ruminant animals and any mammal, so to speak, that recognizes the capsicum present in this product, and through a cascade of hormonal changes decreases the secretion and production of insulin, which then keeps those cows here, if we're talking about dairy cows, into their gluconeogenesis state. So it drives gluconeogenesis, and with that, there is more glucose in the blood, in concentration in the blood, that provided this animal is healthy, can be uptaken by the mammary gland. And we know that glucose is a precursor for lactose, and lactose drives milk volume. Little bit of a simplistic way to look into a very complex metabolic pathway by which, we wanted insulin to be suppressed, gluconeogenesis to be at its best, to drive that glucose concentration in the blood, so the mammary gland, which is non-insulin mediated, can take that glucose and put it into milk production. So in a nutshell, this is what relies behind Nexolin and glucose sparing.
I agree with Gabby. There is a lot of research in a lot of other different species that shows the effects of the capsicum. What's unique about the particular product that we have is it's a microencapsulated product that protects it from rumen degradation. We're feeding a gram, actually is a diluted version of the product to get it to where we can feed it. But we're looking at adding a product that is like cinnamon. It's a dust, and the type of encapsulation that's needed to protect it is very unique in what allows this product to be effective and have the kind of responses that we're seeing. And as Gabby alluded to, the receptors in the lower gut have actually been found in other species. So we know that in animals that consume plant tissues, that receptor is found throughout that particular part of the animal kingdom. That is known to how that functions and how that works and how that feeds back to the liver. So it's a pretty neat molecule and how it works and how it feeds back through the gut to the liver.
How is Nexolin fed, and how often, and how much?
The majority of the positioning we have with Nexolin is with a diluted product, which is fed at 1 gram per head per day. Our program suggested that it starts being fed at 21 days pre-calving, all the way to peak or post-peak. And like I said in the beginning of the podcast here, that really may vary from farm to farm. And what we have seen consistently across many farms in many geographies, so North America, Europe, and South Latam or South Latin America, is that a consistent improvement in milk yield without a depression of dry matter intake or any other impact in the overall health and nutrition of those animals. So, but yeah, when you look at the program, 21 prior to peak or post-peak at about 1 gram per head per day, it can be added to concentrated, vitamin trace mineral mix and incorporated in the farm. Because of such a small inclusion rate, we don't recommend it, mixing at a farm. So any means that this particular product could come to the farm already on a pre-blend, helps ensuring the distribution of that to assure that every cow is getting that the recommended dose of 1 gram.
1 gram is consistent. There's not a variance in how much is recommended. Is that correct?
Correct. So usually, we recommend 1 gram across the period that we define as the transition.
What does Nexulin not do?
I love that question, right? It's just like we spend a lot of time talking about what it does, but not what it doesn't do. So basically, I'll say that it doesn't impact any current nutritional strategy. So it's interesting that you bring this question, because when we were first introduced to Nexulin, the product had a little bit of data out of many countries in Europe, some data out of the US. And what we noticed is that despite the differences in diet and geography and the feed stuff that those cows were consuming, the response was very consistent. And that posed an interesting insight. It's like, okay, this is working regardless of dietary strategies. So further into this process, now going into almost 5 years further researching, we have realized that this continued to sustain. So we have now increased our portfolio of data with more research down in recent trial in Brazil, more data out of the US, and we continue to see that the response is really a physiological response rather than a nutritional related dependent response. So what we don't see with Nexulin is any changes or impact that would interfere with the current nutritional strategies. And maybe Brian, any further thoughts on this?
We have well over 20 different trials, be it university trials, controlled farm trials, on-farm field tests, and we see a consistent response of very little to no changes in dry matter intake that we're finding. No changes in milk composition, milk fat, milk protein, MUNs are staying unchanged. The product seems to improve energetic efficiency of the animal, therefore converting more nutrients from what she consumes into milk and maintaining the composition. So just simply getting in more fluid at the same composition, so you get more fat and protein production without any changes in content levels.
I'm curious about multi-lactation. Have you done research on multi-lactation and how cows react to this a second time through or a third time through?
We don't have a follow-through lactation over lactation trials. Those are quite expensive to follow those cows through. But what we do see is that in trials where we fed Nexulin, we removed and we fed it again, those cows really tended to have a decrease in their milk yield during those periods where the product was removed, which really ties well with the premise of continue to drive the gluconeogenesis and give the animal a better energy status from a glucose perspective to put it into production. I think, Connie, one thing that I like to remind the ones that I talk about this is that this always stands true if your cows are healthy, right? Any animal that is immune activated, like Brian alluded there, under an inflammatory status, have a greater drain for glucose as a precursor to drive that immune system. So that would be also compromising this response that we see if the animal are healthy and how they can uptake this glucose and put it into production.
Are there any side effects or issues that we have to look for or red flags if we're using this in our diets?
I don't think we have been aware of any red flags. We recommend that the feeding rate stays within the recommended dose of 1 gram per head per day. As always, this product, doesn't offer any drug claims. So at any observation or perception that these animals are going to what of a stress or a period where they might need intervention, that they get consulted with their local veterinarians. But based on our experience, we haven't had any red flags that were brought to us based on the use of Nexulin.
Some of the more controlled trials, university trials that have monitored animal health parameters, have not found anything that is unique or different between control and the treatment diets with Nexalin. So we have not found any concerns with feeding it that would be negative or different that way.
Brian, this is a very interesting thing that you brought up that we don't always think about. They are animals of prey. They are more sensitive than other animals might be, and how this all affects right down to their metabolism and how that all works in dairy cows.
I have maybe something to share from a perspective standpoint, Connie, that
Sure.
see if this would be useful to your listeners. I was blessed to be, at Ohio State and going through the honors program and working in the nutrition lab with Dr. Jeff Firkins, and then on to graduate school. And that time period was in the 90s. And that was a unique time where a lot of new nutrition approaches and strategies and management changes were occurring. Some of the things that we become basic to what we're doing. And just to share maybe a bit of a perspective, and in the 80s and 90s, we had a lot of farms that went from 2 times a day milking to 3 times a day milking. Prior to that, a lot of cows were milked in tie stalls, and they moved into a parlor, and then they were able to try milking the cows more frequently with 3 times a day milking. And research is pretty consistent. You got about a 15% improvement in milk production. So that translates to 6 to 10 pounds more milk per cow by doing that. In the 90s, there's work that was done with feeding bypass protein to cows, and how these fresh cows, these early lactation cows, could give 10 pounds more milk when fed bypass protein. And then not far after that, about the time I was coming out of graduate school, Posilac was released, and how BSD and Posilac improved production 7, 8, 9 pounds. So that technology obviously is tried and true, not used by many anymore because of more buyer-related decisions from the milk processors. And then we had Rumensin come out around, I think, 2010, and how Rumensin improved milk efficiency, up around 10%, especially in early lactation cows. And then more recently, we've had some of the work done really around the similar time period, 2010, that time period, with feeding rumen protected amino acids and how it improved milk production, 2 to 6 pounds, but more consistently, we would see a 1/10 to 2/10 of point improvement in milk protein. Where I share this perspective with you is how Nexalin is a technology, a product that actually is a little bit more old school. It fits in with some of these previous technologies and how we're seeing a 5 to 8 pound milk improvement. And consistently across these 20 plus trials and tests that we've done, we've seen consistently that 5 to 8 pound milk response. And it fits into the response we're seeing some of these old and true technologies that we've had from some previous 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago even. It fits into that same kind of category. And I think in time, will fit into that kind of discussion. It's new, and with new, sometimes there's some time to become comfortable with the new technology, but with the responses that we're seeing, it fits into that kind of a response. And from a cost standpoint, it's actually more economical than many of the other technologies that we've had previously.
Gabby, anything to add?
If the listeners here, are kind of walking with us as we discovered or uncovering premise behind Nexalin, I think one of the latest things that we also started looking at is that perhaps how does this also play with the heat? So we know that there is increased inflammation and activation of the immune system, and how this product, which some of the farms has already started, can use as an alternative going into heat stress to provide those animals with the extra energy that might need to overcome or to compensate the detrimental effect that they go through under the heat stress. So there's a lot that we are trying to uncover with the product. It has been very interesting and a successful path that we have been walking. And if you ask me, what wakes you up every morning and drives you, what makes you excited every morning, I think at the moment, this is one of the things that we have at ADM been working really hard at. I concluded a trial analyzing the data this past weekend. Somebody on my team also finishing some data. So a lot of information that we're generating with this, and pretty successful story that we want to be able to hold a podcast in 10 years from now and say, aside of everything that Brian, mentioned here on the list of technologies that have really marked the history of dairy nutrition, that we are confident that this will be part of it as well.
Who knows what will happen in 10 years from now. And I'm hoping that this product is one of those that's on that list. Is there a website, Gabby, that people can go to find out more information about this product and what the research that you're doing?
We have the ADM Animal Nutrition Portal, which is a good way that the listeners can go and check what we have there. The product itself has been presented in many conferences as, rumen bypass capsicum. And then you can see there the Nexolin name or the ADM brand. So there's a lot of information also on the public domain. And as always, we're here to provide any further insights or help in any way that we can to generate those conversations.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you to my guests, Dr. Gabby Acetoze and Dr. Brian Lammers from ADM. We appreciate you spending time with us this morning and talking about this important subject of transition cows. I'm Connie Kuber with Seal Pro Silage Barrier Film by Connor AgriScience, and you've been listening to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. Please subscribe to this podcast, like it, share it with your friends. This would be a great one to share with your nutritionists to get them going on this information as well. So thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day.